The aesthetics are very important, right? Because that's going to be on your marketing collateral, and that's going to be what drives people and attracts people to come stay with you as a whole. But making unique things and functional upgrades in the design as well. So understanding what your target market kind of wants and what they're demanding and what they're going to be using the property for as a whole, I think is the big thing that goes into the design element.
Hey everyone, put your bags down, relax, and welcome to the Room Key, where value add means more than just new paint and a new sign. Today I'm sitting down with Tom Bono, managing partner of Bono Capital Group. Tom comes from the institutional finance world, almost a decade in capital markets with Ernst Young, among others, and he's taken that underwriting discipline into the real world, buying underperforming properties and turning them into higher performing hospitality assets. His team describes their portfolio as 7.2 million with 15 plus value-added projects completed. Tom, I want to go back to the beginning. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in New York originally. Grew up in Queens, so right outside of the city. I was out there for the first 10 years of my life, and then moved out to Long Island. Was out there for second part of my life. I went to school up in Albany, New York, and then when I graduated school, I started working in Manhattan. So a New Yorker from the very beginning.
Nice. So you went to school in Albany. What's your major?
So I ended up double majoring. My primary focus was accounting. Just as I went to school, it was right during like the end of the Great Recession. So I wanted to get something that was a little bit more stable, quote unquote, going out of school, making sure that I would have a job. But I also double majored with business administration, focusing in marketing and management.
All right. So where did you start out? You jumped into Manhattan. What was your first job or two?
Yeah, so I started out at EY, or Ernst Young. I was supposed to be in their consulting practice, but I interned in the structured finance group and did pretty well for myself. And when I started out full time, one of the partners had reached out and said, "Hey, we would love to have you just kind of skip, rotating through different consulting gigs and everything, and just align with us full time." So I had a great experience the summer before with the group, and I said, "Yeah, let's do it." And that has served me in so many different ways than I could have imagined when I did make that decision in the first place.
Nice. What were some of the best parts of those opportunities?
Well, I primarily focus in mortgage-backed securities with a little bit of exposure to asset-backed securities as well. But going through like the due diligence process, learning what some of these major metrics that the larger banks or institutions really focus on, learning things like what DSCR stood for, why it's important and stuff like that. It's just really helped build that like underwriting sense of me before making that transition into real estate investing.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll definitely jump into what you are working on today, which is pretty exciting. But how did that merge? You're at EY. What does that timeline go from then all the way through today, where you're actually purchasing and repositioning assets?
Yeah, so I was commuting from Long Island into Manhattan every single day. And my mom, just give a shout out to Pam here. She was always, a little bug in my ear talking about real estate, real estate, real estate. So at some point along the road, I was wanting to get into investing. I thought I was gonna go down the kind of Warren Buffett, that kind of path over there. But I found out quickly that I'm a little bit of a control freak, and I didn't like the idea of just putting my money into the stock market where I had very little control over what happens on a day to day there.
Yeah.
So I was doing a bunch of research online. I came across this website called Bigger Pockets and just started going down the rabbit hole there. So every day that I was commuting from Long Island into Manhattan and there back, I was listening to podcast episodes. I started reading all the books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad and some of the other ones as well. And I knew that real estate investing was the path for me. But living in New York for a period of time, I was just like, it's a little bit more expensive here than I would like, to make my first investment. So just started, on top of the day-to-day work that I was doing at EY, just building my own education on the side. And eventually not to get sidetracked, but I started working on some like blockchain and crypto engagements while I was at EY, which was really cool and exciting. And I was like, hey, I kind of want to do this a little bit more full time, get more exposure to like client facing experiences and just building out my corporate tool bag, I guess you can call it. So I had the opportunity to leave. I joined Wells Fargo. I was working there for a few years doing some like tech implementation for them, almost acting as like a product manager. So we were building a new tech system for them, so figuring out what the requirements were, working with the development team, which was really cool because it was just a completely different path than what I was doing at EY. But it just wasn't going to be a long-term fit for me. So I ended up joining a small consulting firm for the better part of a year. We were back working with like Freddie, Fannie, and Ginnie Mae, so kind of more in my wheelhouse and what I was doing at EY. But the opportunity kind of came towards the beginning of 2025 here for me to start doing my own thing. And I just said, let me just kind of do what I'm good at and just go all in on the real estate thing. So we definitely skipped the part where I made that transition from New York down to Charlotte, which was in the middle of the pandemic. So when I had left EY, we moved down to Charlotte, North Carolina, just to focus on the real estate thing. So we started out on the residential space and did all the typical stuff you see on HGTV, buying these ran down houses, renovating them, renting them out, and then refinancing them. So leveraging our savings and hard money loans into conventional mortgages. And that was just kind of, the segue into us for just building, our personal investment and portfolio experience and then just taking that full time now.
Yeah. Yeah. So you worked on a lot of institutional level transactions, very different from boots on the ground, your own name, your own credit, your own capital on the line. How did that transition go for you?
I think that having the background and the education over a number of years was definitely helpful. I'm always a little bit more risk averse than my wife and partner is. When we first moved down to Charlotte, we had moved down there for a reason. I kept my W-2 job just so that we can have some income coming in while we kind of figured out this whole, real estate investing thing and not just go completely in at that point. But she was ready to make some offers on deals, and I'm like, I don't feel comfortable like this. And you hear horror stories of people flipping and going, underwater on their first deal, and it was trying to find that fine balance there. So we, getting super nerdy. I had my Excel calculator for underwriting, so I got very comfortable with it. And anytime a deal came in, I was able to analyze it relatively quickly. And that's why when we found out our first deal, we basically had all of 5 or 10 minutes to make a decision on it before it was sold to someone else. We were able to run the numbers. We were familiar with the market, what the after repair value would be in that particular zip code, because we spent a lot of time, doing our research and just exploring the market after we did move down there full time. And it was, it was a risk in a sense because we bought the house sight unseen. But it was for $60,000. So coming from New York and being able to buy a piece of property and with a house on it for $60,000, it's like, what's the worst that could happen here? We're young enough. If we do go belly up, it's not that much money. It's still a lot of money, but compared to $500,000 to $1 million houses up here in New York, it's much more digestible, and it would be a lot easier to recover if we did kind of go belly up there. So that was the way that it just kind of started and segued for us. And as we got comfortable, we started building a team. We started finding our subs. We started learning how to source, the materials and everything like that. Then we just started to, build that comfort, the comfort of being able to, hey, we got this, we know what we're doing, and just started, scaling up from there.
Yeah, you talked about having the subs. So you're the general. Are you doing any of the work yourselves? What is that?
Yeah, so I mean, oftentimes we would, be budgeted, and how these things go. You have a budget for some things, and sometimes you run over pretty quickly. Especially in the beginning, because coming from corporate backgrounds, our first few deals doing this, we didn't know what we didn't know. So there was times where A, we just wanted to do some of the work because we enjoyed that, but B, we also had to do some of the work just to keep ourselves within the budget that we kept there. Thankfully, we've worked out a lot of those issues over the years, and we don't have to do that anymore. But my wife is, full time as our pseudo general contractor slash project manager slash interior designer. She's basically our do it all. So she gets to, have the fun doing the design, managing the crew, and making sure that we're executing on the renovation within budget. And that allows me to focus more on like the technology side, the management, sourcing things like general managers, now what we're looking for in the hotel space, and just focusing on scaling the business versus being, in it, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What part of your finance background has helped you the most in the hospitality? What part maybe useless once you had to deal with it? Guest, staff, renovations?
Yeah, I mean, it's coming from the finance world, and the corporate side of things. It's definitely a lot different than working with blue collar workers. There's just, a level of exposure and things that you're kind of used to, demands of, hey, we have a project deadline due on the 21st, and the client is expecting a deliverable by then. So, coming from a corporate background, the 21st is the 21st, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get it done by that time. But oftentimes when you're dealing with some of these subs, they're like, I just need a few more days, and a few days turn into like multiple days, which can turn into weeks. So there was definitely a big learning curve as far as how to manage different types of folks and how to make sure that incentives were aligned as a whole. So, the financing for doing things like underwriting, the acquisition, negotiating, creating like projections and performance and stuff like that, hugely, hugely, hugely helpful. But not to say that you need to come from a background like that to be able to learn that or understand those things, because there's so many, resources and tools available nowadays that really helps people to get caught up to speed quickly.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Was there a moment throughout this project or, one of your first couple projects where you said, I had no idea it was going to be like this?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a few horror stories, unfortunately. That's just part of the journey. One time, there was, again, we were dealing with a few electricians, and things just weren't going. Every time we expected them to be on site, there's an excuse as far as what happened and why they can't be there. So in order for us to stick within the deadline that we needed to, we had to hire another electrician. But we did that over the phone and weren't on the property, when we kind of made that decision and informed them. So there was a few things that they did to like the electrical wiring and stuff that just left us in a bad spot and made it a little bit harder for the new electrician to come in and fix it for us. So that was just like, whoa, I just never saw that bad side of people before, even though we didn't really, we paid them in advance and tried to treat them as family, so to speak. But yeah, it's definitely a learning curve as far as what people are capable of and kind of seeing the dark side of how, people can be, even though they seem all nice and friendly.
Yeah, yeah. Are there any scar tissue lessons that you would pay to avoid repeating?
Thankfully, nothing that keeps me up at night or was really too terrible. A lot of it was just, having to put in some sweat equity. So, for example, our first Airbnb, it was a major overhaul. We added a second bathroom and a third bedroom to the house itself. But we were completely behind time and low on budget. So back in, a few years ago, we got married, we went on our honeymoon, and the day after we got back from our honeymoon, we had to start tiling 2 bathrooms. So it's that wasn't necessarily fun, coming from paradise down into, tile and getting grout and mortar all over our hands and everything like that. But it was part of the journey, and looking back at it now, we could laugh at it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I do want to dive into what you're doing in the hospitality space. Give us, I guess, a 10,000-foot overview of where you're at right now and what you're looking to do in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the big things was our last acquisition was a commercial mixed-use building, and that was kind of our segue into the commercial world as a whole, because primarily before that we were just solely in residential, but then we've kind of figured out how valuations work in commercial, things like net operating income and just gross revenue really impacts the valuation of these types of properties. So we knew that when it was time to jump back into it and start scaling our portfolio, we wanted to stay with commercial. But at the same time, we really enjoyed the short-term rental experience, creating these cool, unique stays and experiences for our guests. So we said, hey, let's just go down the hospitality gap or route. And it was interesting because, at the same time, let's just call it about 9 months ago or so, kept hearing about this great wealth transfer that's happening from, baby boomers down to millennials or the younger generations, and figuring that there's a gap in hotels and motels specifically. So we said, hey, let's start checking this out. And we found a couple of cool properties, and we're currently under contract on one. It's out here in Long Island in the Hamptons here in New York. It's going to be very cool. So it's 27 keys in total. It's a little over an acre parcel. It's a waterfront property. We have a dock, we have a pool, we have a little fire pit and backyard area. But this is a unique piece of property because it's in a proven market like the Hamptons, where we hope that it'll be a little bit more recession resilient versus some other markets throughout the U.S., especially because of the seasonality and things like that. But like I said, with the Great Wealth Transfer, this property has been owned historically by a family for the better part of 15-20 years at this point. The goal was for the parents to essentially pass it down to their kids, but the kids grew up and didn't want anything to do with it, so they decided to sell it. But at the same time, the parents own it free and clear. They don't have any debt on the property, and they've only been operating it for, let's call it, 4 months out of the year. So for them, they're super happy about just collecting a few $100,000 worth of revenue during that time. And if it's not broken, they don't have to fix it. But for us, we see a lot of potential because it's in a very amazing location. It's a very unique property itself, but there's so many more additional revenue streams that we can introduce to the property as a whole. So, for example, there's a clubhouse that's located towards the back of the property where they've only been serving continental breakfast out of. So one of our big things is applying for a liquor license and converting the coffee bar into an actual bar area. So that'll mean, changing and adding this, a small commercial kitchen. We'll do a strategic, food menu, just so that it's not a full, food and beverage operation there. But just doing things like that, adding, new revenue streams like beer, wine, and liquor, and that'll help, improve the valuation of the property tremendously right there alone.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Any improvement you're doing to the bottom line is an improvement to the value, especially long term. If you're building a brand per se, if you're building something that people are going to come back to over and over again,
right?
That's where a lot of the value is built in over time.
Yeah, exactly. So, long term, this is what we're looking for. We're looking for, proven locations where we know that there's demand and there's a lot of guests that are traveling to this year over year.
Yeah.
But we're also looking for assets that have been performing well, but just not optimized as much as they could be for a variety of reasons. So we'll look to be adding, a few other revenue streams to this particular property, but, also looking for places that are not managed, not optimized, not automated. So things like keyless, check-ins where guests kind of have their check-in information before they even get to the hotel or motel in the first place. Streamlining operations by introducing virtual assistants and stuff like that. I think just will help improve the operations and the financial performance overall. But yeah, just essentially we're looking to scale over the next few years, just improving locations with assets that have been performing, but just not as much as their potential has for them.
Yeah, and most investors are chasing stabilized assets, right? Especially your experience in the institutional world. You're doing the opposite. Why?
I like to be creative, and I think that a lot of times people are trying to go for these branded, hotels and getting the Marriott or the Hilton type of flagship over you. It has plenty of perks for it, but you also have to play within their playbook at that time, or so to speak, right? So you have certain types of materials that you can use, certain ways of operations and things like that. Whereas if you're doing something a little bit more boutique, something that you can kind of run to your own, beat to your own drum, so to speak, you have a much more freedom and liberty to get creative with things. And you can also go push the edge a little bit more with the design, which is something that's pretty big for us.
Yeah. And I've heard you say that you're not buying stabilized, you're buying potential. Walk me through what the potential looks like for you, especially in the first 30 days after close.
So for this particular one, because it's a seasonal market, we're going to take advantage of the fact that it's already shut down. This particular property has only been operating from Memorial Day through Labor Day. So we'll be closing in the next couple of months, and the property will be shut down for the season. So we'll be leveraging that time just to get through the renovations, to uplift the commercial kitchen a little bit, convert that clubhouse into more of a liquor and bar type atmosphere, and getting ready for the season on having these new revenue streams ready to roll there. So it's understanding like the timeline on what we need to get done, but what we can introduce and what that'll impact, later on. So if we were trying to find something else that was already up and running, we would have to take a little bit of a different approach and understand, hey, do we want to shut down and renovate this and lose out on revenue immediately? Or do we want to kind of do it in blocks of rooms and get creative that way? So I think every property is a little bit different, but for this one in particular, the potential is going to be just getting everything ready for the summer, and just having everything ready to go, so that when we have our first guests come in, they have a brand new experience than what they've had, especially if they're a repeat customer there.
Very nice. What's your projected open date?
So we're looking to get ready by Memorial Day of 2026. Big reason is that the U.S. Open will be out in the Hamptons in June of next year. So
Yep.
we just have to make sure that we're ready for that. There'll be a big occupancy spike at that point there. Obviously, that'll impact rates a little bit as well. And the way that we'll be kind of prioritizing the work is making sure that we have these new revenue streams ready to go. So converting the clubhouse, getting this kind of shack that's next to the pool area, we're going to convert that into a snack bar. So we'll be selling like chips, sodas, sunscreen, towels, and beer, wine, and everything when we have the license in place. But that'll be the focus, and then we'll also focus on renovating the best selling rooms, so that if the event comes that we're at Memorial Day and we're only halfway renovated with the rooms, we can keep those other blocks of rooms open as is and just kind of do a reduced rate there.
Yep.
So it won't necessarily like impact us from being ready for the season itself.
Very nice. Awesome. When you say that boutique motels are the opportunity, what conditions have to be true for that to work?
So in order for them to be a good opportunity, I think a lot of things is the purchase price as a whole, right? Making sure that you can get something that's a little bit more fair market value versus something that's a little bit overpriced. So as I mentioned before, a lot of times like these operators, they don't have any debt on the property. They've owned it for a number of years, and from their perspective, if it's not broke, don't fix it type of thing. So they're happy with just kind of collecting the revenue that's there. So that also gives a little bit of opportunity as being able to come in and be like, hey, the HVACs are going to go out next year, and there's a bunch of money that's going to be lifted there. So we have to take that into consideration when we're talking about the final sales price or getting some type of seller credit or something like that as we're doing our due diligence. So finding something that is fair market value and that's just not outrageously overpriced is one of the things. But also having operations in place and proving that the location and the asset can perform even as is something else that is very important as well. So I think that it's kind of a combination of those things there.
Yeah. What would you say are some of the biggest misconceptions that people have about motel repositioning?
Well, I think motels just get a bad stigma, whether it's back from the 60s, 70s, or whenever they were most popular. There's kind of this connotation around it. But I think at the end of the day, it just really comes down to how the property is renovated and how the operations are performing as a whole. Because it could be better than your traditional hotel. Instead of having to take an elevator up to the 15th floor or something like that, you're able to just walk out your room and straight to the car and go travel and do whatever you want to do for the day. So I definitely think motels have a negative stigma for them, but as more of these baby boomers are retiring and more younger operators are coming in and putting their new unique twist and spin on things, we'll kind of see more and more of these kind of boutique motels pop up and become more popular.
Yeah. It's one thing I love about the hospitality industry, and it it proves itself out because look at how many different brands you have. There's hundreds, literally, of different franchised brands, and then you got to throw into all the boutiques. So people are looking for different products. It's not like fast food, right? You still have probably 50 different fast food brands, but you see the same thing over and over and over again, and you don't see a lot of, we'll call it the boutique, the same kind of thing as the hotels, but you have so many different opportunities to create a unique experience and tailor to exactly what it is that your customer wants. And I love that, how many different options there are inside the hospitality world.
For sure. And one of the things, I don't have the exact data to back this up, but over the years, what we've been noticing is that Airbnbs have obviously become more and more popular over the past few years. And there's a lot of the reasons for that was people wanted to get away from hotels, just to kind of get these unique kind of design differentiators, or being able to have their own space with a kitchen, or even kitchenette at times, or things like that. But I think after COVID, because interest rates were so low, a lot of people were able to lock in these starter homes at 2, 3, 4% interest rates. So fast forward a few years, and they have these attractive interest rates, and they just don't want to get rid of them because they can make money off of doing that. So I think over the past 2 years, especially, there's definitely been an increase in supply in the Airbnb market. But with that, I think that there's some bad operators, Airbnb operators, that should not be Airbnb hosts in the first place. And that's been impacting guest experiences over time. And now we're starting to see more of a shift from Airbnbs over to the hotels or motels. So I think that's why this boutique kind of feel is definitely trending at this point, and it's going to be more prevalent over the next few years, because it's still the kind of the best of both worlds, where you get to go to an established place where you have operations and you have like online reviews, and you can see that, month over month, year over year, the operation, what you're going to get from coming there, but you can also get this unique vibe and experience that you wouldn't get at, a branded like Hilton or Marriott necessarily.
Right, exactly. Okay, jumping in, say you are looking at a motel. You've got an owner that's sitting on an older property, frozen ADR, no tech. What is the fastest path to improving the upside without overspending?
Again, yeah, I'll give you the classic consulting answer. It depends, right?
Of course.
I think that, one of the big things is if you have a frozen ADR and you have a low tech stack in place, it's really trying to get one of these new property management systems in place, or kind of price analysis software, so you can understand what the market actually looks like. And you can say, hey, this property's only been charging $100 a night, but the property right down the street has been charging $200 a night. And then you could really just dig in to see, why is that happening? Why is that property getting a little bit more? Is it because of the demand, or is it because the operator just didn't realize that they could be charging a little bit more for it? So being able to implement some of these newer data sources and automated features is definitely probably the biggest lift initially.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've just closed on the next motel, 25, 40 key motel in a strong location. What are the first 5 moves that you make? Or maybe what are the first few questions that you ask yourself to determine the right moves?
Definitely understanding, one, what type of technology do they already have in place, or are they doing everything by hand? We were looking at another property a few months back, and when I asked them for historical records, they had to go into self-storage like locker and get them out, because they were literally doing everything by hand there. So one, understanding what the technology kind of looks like and how you're going to be able to improve it. B, definitely assessing and understanding what the operations are in place, and especially from a management perspective. So understanding, is there a general manager in place that's actually doing their job and doing well, or are they just kind of there just, checking the boxes, so to speak, and not really, trying to improve that guest performance as a whole. Also understanding things like the cleaning schedule, how that's kind of worked out, if they're overcharging. And then just kind of looking at the pay, not the financials, and just trying to go line by line and understand, are all these expenses actually making sense, or is there room for us to get creative and switch things around so that we could just, make it more profitable, just like, addition by Oh, addition by subtraction.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you look at the old adage of the three-legged stool in hospitality, the product, the operations, and the marketing. What kind of opportunity are you looking for as far as what do you want to be working well and what do you not really care about because you're going to completely change it anyway?
Yeah, so I think definitely the product, right? Meaning, like, what we're purchasing in the first place. I think that's the biggest thing for me. It would be a lot riskier in my perspective if you were to, buy a hotel that hasn't been operating for a number of years, just because you don't know how the market has kind of shifted from the last time that they were operating to now, and you're just purely going off of projections at that point, which is fair. And oftentimes, a lot of these investments are based off of your pro forma and your projections, but again, I like to be a little bit more conservative when I do these things. So I try to mimic a lot of, what the historical averages have been over time so that I don't feel like I'm getting too crazy as far as my projections. So, for example, if a property has been generating, $500,000 a year in gross revenue, and then I come in and say, hey, you know what, we can make these tweaks and jump it up to 1.5 million a year. That's a pretty big jump, right? So it's as much as I believe in my ability to execute, you have some data to kind of back you up there. Well, whereas if you kind of make that same assumption with a property that hasn't been operating from a number of years, it's a quick way to get lost.
Yes, yeah. There's so much work, especially with a property that, like you're describing, owners had it for quite a while. They're not really putting in, their own heart into it anymore. They bought it with grand expectations, probably did an awesome job to begin with, and then slowly just got too much for them, or they're nearing retirement and they just don't really care as much, and they're not giving it the love that it needs in order to really fully perform. Would you say you find the hidden NOI in an underperforming property? Are there any specific areas that you really look for?
Just understanding the layout of the property as a whole and just seeing where the opportunity kind of lies there. So again, like for example, going back to the Hamptons project here, they have the clubhouse where they've only been serving continental breakfast out of, but not having any beer or wine sales is just, for a property that has, a pool, it's a waterfront, and they have a lot more, events that they can kind of throw to generate, more guests staying there and just spending the nights there versus going out in town. That was a big thing for me. So, especially for one of the other deals that we were looking at, is there was kind of this vacant area built next to the lobby, where there was just kind of being used for storage, but there was access going right out to the pool, and it could easily be like a micro mart or even like a small bar in there as well. So I definitely think the food and beverage sales is a big aspect of that. But also just looking at the amenities and seeing how, the introduction of a thing like a gym or, just small things like a fire pit or paddleboard outside or something. Those are just things that just enhance the property's value and just attracts more guests to come there. So just kind of assessing what's there and what could be there, I think is the biggest thing. And sometimes that takes a little bit of vision.
Yeah, and a lot of those types of things, the activities, you not only you want to attract those types of people that are going to want those activities, but if they're spending times having fun on the property as opposed to going out and finding fun somewhere else, you're obviously increasing the demand for your F&B. And there's so many, the trend right now is huge and has been for a decade or more, where especially the higher end, upper mid-scale, upscale luxury, and especially the boutique properties, the F&B can sometimes be more revenue than the room revenue itself. And really
Absolutely.
diving into that is, I think, is huge for especially a property like that.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you're in a seasonal market and people are there for vacation, and they're trying to have fun, and if they drink or whatever, people don't want to have to drive or get an Uber, sit in traffic, or come back and kind of deal with that. Or if they have an option right on the premise where they are, they get to experience and enjoy everything that they want, and then still able to eat and drink and still have an amazing time. You're only improving the guest experience there.
What do you think about design upgrades to the rooms themselves that raise the ADR versus design upgrades that just look good on Instagram, look good on marketing?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely has to be some functionality to it as well. You can make it, Instagrammable, but if you don't have a working toilet or sink at the end of the day, that's not going to make, anything good. So the aesthetics are very important, right? Because that's going to be on your marketing collateral, and that's going to be what drives people and attracts people to come stay with you as a whole. But making, unique things and functional upgrades in the design as well. So, if you have like a small TV on a massive wall and people are going to be spending time in their room a lot, that's something that's not really, attractive or useful for them. So understanding what your target market kind of wants and what they're demanding and what they're going to be using the property for as a whole, I think is a big thing that goes into the design element. For us particularly, I know having some type of kitchenette is fairly attractive to some of the guests that we're targeting. So making sure that we have good micro like mini fridges and things like that is going to be important, just so guests can go out if they're eating dinner down the street and they want to keep that for lunch the next day, but they don't have a refrigerator that's working or not working very good. It makes it hard for them. So just having some of these extra add-ons that aren't necessarily designed, but if you incorporate them in a tasteful way, it definitely helps make a difference.
Absolutely. And especially that, again, the potential for repeat people coming in. Again, that's huge for the market that you're in. Any market, it definitely helps.
Absolutely.
Are there any tech stack changes that are non-negotiables for you?
At this point, having kind of the pricing softwares to kind of understand what the demand is for particular markets, so things like price labs, that's very important for us, just so we can we don't have to actually manually start checking and understanding what competition is charging on a nightly basis. That's all automated for us. Having an upgraded PMS system, so things like Muse. I think that's a non-negotiable for us, just because of how automated it could be, but also how it connects with some of these other software. So it helps make things like the cleaning schedule get updated immediately and streamlined as well. So I think those are the two biggest things that are just absolute non-negotiables for us.
Nice. Along those lines, are there 2 to 3 KPIs that you obsess over on a regular basis?
The biggest thing is the ADR. I think for us, RevPAR isn't necessarily one of the big ones that I focus on. Occupancy rate, understanding that is very big. And then I just like to track the gross revenue as much as I possibly can.
Nice. Any examples of small operational changes that can create outsized valuation, just conceptually without naming a property?
Yeah, I think cleaning is a big expense, right? So if you can figure out a way to cut that down somehow, I think that's tremendous. So a lot of times, some of these properties don't have washer dryers on the premises, and they're partnering with local companies to kind of do that, which is great. It's reliable. It's a less of a headache from an operational standpoint, but the costs are oftentimes 25 to 50+% more than what you would be doing if you kept everything in house. So
Yep.
things like it obviously is a little bit more of a upfront cost by purchasing commercial dryers or the washer units, but over time they more than pay for themselves and help reduce the burden on the back end. So I think that's like a big way of just kind of looking at it, and also understanding the cleaning staff and how that's kind of managed. If you're partnering with a company, or if you're just relying on someone living on the property to kind of handle that for you, there's ways to kind of cut down those costs as well that make huge improvements to the bottom line in the long run.
Yeah, that is huge. I saw you post about the Hampton property, about being on site before closing, surveys, contracts, even kitchen requirements. Why do you push so hard for the work to be done before you own the asset?
Well, for this particular property, right, because we'll be closing in February and we have a tight turnaround, having to get it ready by Memorial Day next year, we're already going to have a limited amount of time to be able to get the work done. So as much as we can get done now and just start getting the project plan built out, getting all of our quotes in order, it's going to be able to make us expedite the process and accelerate it a lot more than if we have to wait until February and to start getting quotes and all this stuff. So A lot of times as well, because we're getting traditional financing for this property, things like getting an appraisal, getting an environmental phase one, these are kind of non-negotiables when it comes to getting that financing in place. So it's a combination of just complying with what is needed for the debt side of things, but also just in this unique position, just trying to get ourselves so that we can hit the ground running when we do close.
Is there anything that's on your pre-close checklist that you think will prevent an expensive surprise?
We don't know what we don't know. It's as much as you kind of turn every rock over and do all of your checks and stuff like that. We're not opening up any walls, right? So we don't really know as much as we can. We inspect all the mechanicals, plumbing, electrical, and all those things like that. But once we start taking down some walls, you always find some surprises here and there. So that's just kind of some risk, and that's why you have a contingency in place when you're doing this underwriting, just in case things pop up and you got to spend a little extra money here that you weren't really accounting for. You just having that buffer really makes things a lot easier. But yeah, unless there's some type of like flood that happens or anything crazy like that, knock on wood, we should be in pretty good shape.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like Mike Tyson said, you can have a plan all you want until you get hit in the mouth. Then stuff changes. Then you just kind of roll with it, right? That's
Yeah,
what the
exactly.
successful investors are able to roll with whatever punches come.
Yeah, one of the big things about investing, entrepreneurship is problem solving, right? So these things are going to happen
Yeah.
whether it's during the renovation, during the opening day, during the season, or thereafter. Things happen, right? That's part of life. That's part of the journey. It's part of just real estate operations as a whole. So it's just keeping a cool head and just figuring out the most practical and pragmatic way of handling that situation, just so you can get past it and move on. So if that means that for example, if we go completely over budget on something and we're not able to get to all the room renovations, that's where like, okay, we can still operate as is for this season and then get through the rest of the renovations thereafter. Okay, if we run out of money, then what do we do? Instead of doing a capital call, is there a way for us to get a construction loan so that we don't have to bring on more investors or ask for more money coming on here? So just kind of
Yeah.
thinking through these scenarios beforehand as well, just so you can prepare as best as you can. But it's sometimes these things happen on the fly, and things happen that you would never expect. And so, having an advisory team or partners in place that have done this before is really also helpful, so that you have a sounding board, and you can leverage their experience without necessarily living with a scar.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have, traditional debt in place, that partnership itself brings a lot of information, a lot of good perspective that they've been through many of those deals. They know what kills deals and what, takes a deal and turns it sideways. So having that partnership, taking a look at everything as well, is crucially important.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, most of the times these banks have been underwriting many more deals than I ever have. So they've been around the block way more. They know, what works, what doesn't work, where you might be out of whack on stuff. So it's also being open to receiving feedback and then adjusting as needed to, just to make sure that you can still continue on without just being stubborn and just saying, no, I'm right, and we have to do it this way.
Absolutely. You obviously have your hands full with this project. You actively looking for the next one, the next year or two?
Yes, we're looking to have something else in place over the next few months, hopefully. We're looking at a few different properties. We have our eyes set on one in particular. So, we'll be pretty, heads down and focus on getting this ready over the next few months, but we'll look for something to kind of round out the seasonality of this particular property and kind of balance that out for the portfolio. So, yeah, we're definitely looking on scaling over the next year or so, whether that's one or two. We don't want to overextend ourselves and bite off more than we could chew. But there is definitely, great opportunity out there right now, and we want to make sure that we try and, find the right assets in the right locations as they come up and not say no to anything because, again, that's why we're kind of building up this staff and this team so that we can focus working more on the business versus in the business.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You've obviously been a part of different types of projects. Are you very focused on the hospitality? Are you looking at everything? What's
Right
your
now, yeah,
window?
right now we're really just focused on the hospitality space, just because we
Nice.
feel like we have a good game plan and playbook to implement here. And again, we kind of want to take advantage of the opportunity that we see and the gap in the market as a whole. But as we get, a few more under our belt and we start scaling, we do own a commercial mixed-use building, so we obviously like that type of asset class as well. There's a little bit more creativity that you can get with that. But with the rise of things like AI, I think data centers are going to be more and more prevalent, so we'll start looking at those. And
Yep.
self-storage has always been a proven cash flow asset as well. So we'll look to kind of diversify into there over the next few years and not just go all in on hospitality.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of my audience, obviously, are hotel owners, so typically not passive investors. However, I do work with a number of owners, even right now, that are slowly selling out their portfolio or their single hotel asset and retiring from the operation side and potentially moving into the passive side. They've lived and breathed hotels for decades, some of them their entire lives, so they know it, they trust it. But instead of coming from the invest with me mindset, I want to talk about how serious operators think about the alignment and trust.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, one of the big things that everyone asks when you're raising money or bringing on partners is things like a co-invest, right? Are you going to be contributing any money to the deal yourself, or are you just trying to play with everyone else's money, so to speak?
Sure.
So, Liz and I, we've done everything, our entire portfolio ourselves without doing any partners, and having been completely invested in every project that we've touched, and that's something that we want to continue doing. So, because we obviously want to have more financial gains in place for there and ownership, but also to show that we're serious about this and that we also have our own money at stake and not just using investors' money. But also making sure that the incentives are aligned with the asset management. If you're going to be doing things like a disposition fee or stuff like that, making sure that there's checks and balances in place so that everyone knows that you're not doing it just for a fee and you're just trying to get it off like the books quickly, but you're always acting in the best interest of the other investors as well. So trust and loyalty is definitely one of the biggest things that we implement at home, but also for our investors, and we kind of think of it as family. At the end of the day, we're going to treat everyone with the same respect that we would with anyone that comes into our house, and we want to make sure that we're as transparent as possible with everything. So sometimes that might involve having uncomfortable conversations, but it's necessary for the relationship because just because something might go sour on this deal, if you act in the right way, that doesn't prevent you from working with the same person later on down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the transparency, no surprises. What does that look like in practice? You talked about having those hard questions, the hard conversations. Do you have a specific reporting cadence, KPIs, decision rights?
Yeah, so all that stuff is kind of drafted in the operating agreements itself, right? So making sure that the investors or partners are comfortable with kind of their voting rights and how they can kind of come in if, let's just say I go off the deep rails and I say, hey, we got to paint this entire place pink on the outside, but it will look like, a giant flamingo at the end of the day in the middle of the
Right.
Hamptons, right? There has to be some types of checks and balances in place where they could be like, no, we're not on board and we don't want to spend that money like doing things like that. So making sure that there's some type of way that they can contribute to the decision making is one. But especially during the renovations, right? We'll do every 2 weeks. We'll start sending the pictures and giving detailed emails out to our investors, just giving them an update on where we're at, what we've tackled to date, what percentage of the way through the project plan we're at, any hiccups that happen. But if we start opening up the walls and we see that there's plumbing leaks in every single room, that's not going to be something that I just want to convey over an email. That's something that's going to have to get on a video call and just address it head on.
Yeah.
Deal with the situation, answer any questions that come up, and then just present the different possible routes that you can go down to solve it. So. But yeah, once you get past that, you will have our quarterly distributions is how we set it up. We'll also be, sending out emails every 3 months as well with just general updates as far as performance and where we kind of see the market shifting and what we're thinking on trying to implement, moving forward, just so there's a constant line of communication. And my big thing is just giving out my cell phone number. So if anyone does have a question, they want to text me or something, whether it's over email or you just want to you call me, I'm always going to pick up the phone to make sure that, I'm not going to avoid you by any sense.
Yeah, Absolutely. I'm excited to watch what you do in that space. Changing tack a little bit, if you could give one piece of advice to an owner who wants to sell in the next 1 to 2 years, what would you focus on first?
I would definitely understand what's going well for you right now and what can you build on even more, right? So at the end of the day, owners, if they're going to sell, you want to make the most money as you possibly can. But if you're asking for something that's maybe $1 million more than what it could be, maybe there's a way that you can bridge the gap a little bit by implementing a new tech system or replacing the roof that is going to need to be replaced. So just doing the right thing as well from their perspective and trying to set up the property to be as attractive as possible for a potential buyer, I think is one of the key things versus just coming up with a number, being dead set on it, and not flexing or budging at all.
Yeah. And you've looked at a number of properties, a number of deals. Is there one silent value killer that you see when you walk properties?
I think the exterior of the buildings can oftentimes be that. So, if you're walking a property and you see, sidings missing all over the place, or you see like foam, like, the spray foam, like gap fillers and stuff like that, just all
Yep.
over, there's going to need to be money that's needs to be put in there. And if that's going out on the outside, there's generally things that are going on behind the walls or inside as well that are going to need to get tackled. So, and like I said, those are kind of hard to see sometimes unless you walk in and you smell mold or you see, water stains on the ceiling and stuff like that. So, judging the outside, I think oftentimes can, you don't want to judge a book by its cover, but oftentimes that's an indicator that there's larger issues at hand.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Before you check out, you've got to have your wake up call. A few quick questions that don't necessarily have a specific topic. What's the first number that you look at when someone sends you a deal?
NOI.
Why?
I just like to see, again, looking at the asset and just saying, if someone sends me a deal and, they're asking, let's just call it $5 million for it, but the net operating income is only, 100,000, using things like the cap rate to come back to a valuation on that, you could tell it's just completely off. Well, depending on what the cap rate is for that particular submarket there. So I always kind of like to work backwards and just trying to make sure that the price is somewhat in line with what they're asking for. And if not, that's usually, it might be a hard pass unless you get lucky with negotiations.
Yes. What's one renovation item you'll almost always do no matter what?
Almost always, I would say, just touching all the rooms itself. My wife and I, we have a pretty bold taste or style that we like, and we want to make sure that kind of comes through on everyone. So sometimes it could be nice and it could be in a good way, but it's just not how we would do it. And we found that people sometimes like our style and our taste, so we want to make sure that carries through.
Yeah. What would you say is the most overrated hospitality metric?
I think number of keys might be one that gets a little bit caught up on sometimes. When we first started looking, people were like, oh, you got to get anything, 40 keys or more, and anything lower than that isn't worth it. Well, that's not necessarily true, right? If you're only looking from a room revenue perspective, sure, that could be right. But if there's opportunities to add things like F&B or, ancillary revenue streams like, adding events or like wedding or like things of that nature, there's other ways that you can generate more revenue that doesn't necessarily correlate with the number of keys that you have.
Yeah, I like that. What's a belief that you've had about hotels, motels 2 years ago that you've completely changed your mind on?
I would say at least 2 years ago, I would never thought that like you could potentially own one like that. I stayed in plenty of hotels before, and enjoyed being in them, but the idea of actually owning one and operating it just seems so far like beyond me. But now that you're like, oh wait, you can actually purchase these things, they're for sale on the market, and like there's an opportunity here. So that's definitely something I had to get my mind around before, especially when we first made the decision to jump into the hospitality space.
Yeah,
But it's really cool to think of it from the lens of an owner versus just a guest.
very nice. I like that. What's your non-negotiable for the kind of operator that you want to become?
Non-negotiable is transparent in everything that I do. I'm not going to try and hide anything or lie to anyone or anything like that. So, like I said, just tackling any type of situation that comes, being transparent and just working towards a solution versus just trying to brush it under the rug is not anything I could do. It's sometimes people just try to push through deals for whatever reason, or they just try to just deal with it and like, it's not a big deal. I'm not going to bring this up. But no, I'd rather everyone be on the same page and me disclose everything, because you never know what that's going to, there's a leak in room number one that I'm not going to talk to the guest about right or the owners about right now, just because like it's not a big deal. But if you don't tackle that, you don't address it now, and then 2 years down the road, that becomes into a much bigger problem. And they're like, well, why didn't you tell us or bring this up to us in the first place? So it's just,
Yeah,
being accountable and holding yourself accountable is something that I've always wanted to do. I've always done, and that's absolutely a non-negotiable for me. Just because it helps me, know I'm doing the right thing, and it helps me sleep at night.
that's awesome. I'm excited to see where you take all of this. Tom, thank you again for joining us. I think our audience is going to get a lot out of this.
Thanks, Chase. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.